Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. Désolé pour le retard, on a eu un petit problème son. Du coup, on va faire un petit speedrun parce qu'effectivement, on a perdu à peu près 10 minutes. Il y a quelques personnes dans la salle, je pense, qui sont anglophones, donc si ça va tout, je vais faire la présentation en anglais. Mais il y a un support de toute façon derrière, vous avez la traduction si besoin. Et puis, on fera le Q&A, on peut faire en anglais et en français. So now I'm going to switch to English. So thank you so much all for being here. Super happy to be in Lille. It had been a decade since I was last here. I'm originally from France. And so, yeah, I'm here to talk a little bit about our experience at Blackbird Interactive, basically running a hybrid studio that does original IP and work for hire. So what we're going to go through with this talk, it's pretty simple, is I'm going to give you a quick overview of what the studio is like today and how we got there, what kind of inspired this model. And then, you know, throughout over a decade of operating this way with original IP and work for hire, what are kind of like the benefits we've seen in this model, but also some of the challenges, because really it's a candid, honest talk. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions. So I just want to frame things a little to start. I'm not here, you know, to deliver a blueprint and telling you what to do. The truth is, as we all know, video games are complicated. The market is very complicated right now. So it's more like sharing a very specific experience and giving you, you know, enough elements that you can then translate that experience to your situation and do one of your studio. That's really the ambition here. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is I come from a background of marketing, and now I'm in charge of business development. So, you know, sometimes some of you might be production people and you may have some very deep question about how you balance those two very different lines of work. And I may not have all the answers there. I'm giving you kind of like the perspective that I'm lucky to have because I sit at the intersection of many disciplines. So it's kind of a more of a general perspective. And the other thing is I'm not here to sell you on you should do this, or you should do work for hire only, or you should do original IP only. You know, there's tons of studios that have found successes in all the different models. And it also depends on, you know, your aspirations and your teams. So here again, you know, I'm sharing a detailed experience, then you take it just like you take, you know, a movie critic, and then you know where the critics stand, and then it helps you form your own opinion. Okay, so first, let's start with a bit of context, and let's talk about myself. So I work right now at Blackbird Interactive. I'm in charge of business development and communications, but my background really is in marketing and communications. I've worked for a bunch of studios, mostly in Canada. One of them, Hinterland, actually, Raf is in the room today, so thanks for being here and supportive. Really appreciate it. So if you don't know Hinterland, they make The Long Dark, amazing survival game that's very different from all the other games, non-violent. And so before that, I've also worked at Relic Entertainment on the Company Ferris franchise. And I started the industry 12, 14 years ago, actually here in France, when Bethesda opened local marketing offices. And before that, my background was in advertising. So really the things that make me tick is more kind of like, you know, understanding players and the audience, positioning and strategy. And obviously, even though this topic here is a little bit different, what we're going to talk about, I have this lens with me. And so what I look at is very much informed by, you know, in games you have cultures and way people appropriate objects and what it does to them and how they relate to them. And to me, there's the same element at play at work for hire and original IP in a studio. And that's what I want to talk about much more, or at least I feel much more qualified to talk about that than telling you, you know, how to balance it out in terms of a production and staffing and cost, even though we'll touch on that. So to tell you a little bit more about Blackbird, the studio's been around for about 15 years now. It's a Vancouver-based studio in Canada. It was created by some of the original founders of Relic. So Relic, very storied studio, who did the Dawn of War series, Company of Heroes, more recently Age of Empires 4. And so Blackbird, you know, rightly so, started kind of like as a spiritual successor to Relic a little bit, making strategy games, and actually continuing the Homeworld franchise, which is what Relic was originally known for and what the original creators of Relic, who created Blackbird, also were known for. And then we've branched out since then. So we did Deserts of Karak, a prequel. We did Homeworld 3, a sequel. But we also did our own original IP, Hardspace Shipbreaker, with Focus, a French publisher. And we've done quite a bit of work for hire as well. We did a whole Minecraft game, Minecraft Legends. Actually, if you've seen the Minecraft movie, there are bits of Minecraft Legends in there you may not know about, but they're in there. I'll touch on that later. And then we've, started kind of like branching out as well in terms of the work for hire we do. So a lot of work before was full development for us, like Minecraft Legends is a whole game, but we started doing a bit more co-dev as well, or ports and remakes and remasters. So recently we did the Warcraft Battle Chess remaster with Warcraft 1, 2, 3. And then the market is evolving again, and challenges are evolving again. And so recently we've actually started working in a different setup that I'll touch on as well, with really more independent and smaller studios, and kind of like helping them in terms of like sharing resources, and also kind of like insight and knowledge. And so that's the ones you have at the bottom. Ambrosia Sky, which opened the PC gaming show, done by Joel Burgess and his team, former Bethesda and Ubisoft. And then Rise of the Deceiver, Wu-Tang Clan game. So yeah, to finish on Blackbird, I'm going to show you kind of like the presentation video we've put together, because here again, it's not a sell job on the studio, but I think the way the studio talks about itself in the video is interesting, is good context for our conversation and how we try to balance this kind of like dual identity. So, okay, there's no sound, so I will need you above there to send the video if you hear me. Yeah, perfect.
Blackbird Interactive is a studio based out of Vancouver, Canada. It was founded by a number of industry veterans from Relic and EA. One of the things that really inspired Blackbird was a simple statement, was that we wanted to make great games with great people, working with great partners. That trifecta is really the backbone of creating incredible experiences at the studio. As a studio, we've always tried to enable all of our creators. We believe that great games come from a team really driving to create something incredible. And you don't get that if the team doesn't believe it themselves. We really want what we would call soul or hand of the artist. We want to see the hand of the artist come through in the experience. And what we see in art, if you ask someone to create a character or to create a vehicle, they can fulfill that, the letter of the law, or they can leave a part of themselves in it that makes it special.
2-1, switch to factory.
And that's really what we want to do. We want to create games that have that soul and vibe of the creator. And so it's important to us to, one, hire the best that can achieve that. And then two is to empower them and really enable them to create games that leaves a part of themselves in it, to create a product that players can carry with them for a lifetime.
Okay, so that gives you a good sense of Blackbird. And so now let's talk a little bit about that model that we've adopted. So it's not something really new. Honestly, it's actually a very classic model that has been powering very successful companies. So you obviously all know Blizzard today, but what you may not know is that Blizzard started at Silicon and Synapse, and they were actually doing quite a bit of work for hire. They did a Superman action game, they did a bunch of other things, and then they started taking their own shots at some point, Lost Vikings to start, and then eventually landed on Warcraft, and that was the thing that really, catapulted them in the stratosphere. Mediatonic is the same thing. They were mostly a codev and work for hire studio. And then eventually they found success with Fall Guys. Same thing with Psyonix and Rocket League. Gearbox, before they did Borderlands, they were doing some of the expansions for Half-Life. They did the PC port for Halo. And Digital Extremes is the same with Warframe. So really, it's nothing new, and it's something we've borrowed, respectfully. And even the title of that talk, Crawl, Walk, Run, is something we've borrowed from actually Alan Adam. He's one of the founder of Blizzard, and we had the chance to meet with him a few times, and he's actually the one who told us, okay, the thing you're doing is, very reminiscent of what we've been doing, and that's how we used to call it. And so this is the 3 steps that, basically equals crawl, walk, run. Is the first is establishing the company with, work for hire. It's like you may not have, the ability right now to sign your dream game. It may be too ambitious, but also the important thing is you also want to start working together to build those kind of synapses and pipelines and habits. So it's good for that. Plus it brings in money. We all need money to work. So, you need to keep the business running. And then hopefully if you manage it well enough, you manage to, carve out a little bit on the side, and then you start to experiment and iterate. So here you have the example of Behaviour. You see at on the left, their first games, just work for hire, very classic. And then they took a few shots at games that are, mostly now completely forgotten. I don't know if anyone remembers Naughty Bear or Wet, which was actually published by Bethesda, which is, why I remember it. But so they did those games, which eventually, didn't find success, but at least they had the opportunity because they had the work for hire at the back to take, more shots at the board. And eventually there's a dart that landed, and that dart was, Dead by Daylight. And so now it's been like the engine of the company, really. But interestingly so, now they've even moved into like the next phase, the ultimate phase, where they don't just build enduring IPs, they actually try to acquire them and kind of build synergy around it. So now they've got an angle to their approach, which is around horror, and so they've actually acquired a Vancouver studio, Red Hook, the makers of Darkest Dungeon. So really, the hope when you do this model is that things go this way. That's kind of like the best case scenario. So you do work for hire, which obviously, creates a bit of profit margin. Also might allow you to learn new skills or develop new tech that you might be able to reuse in one of your games. And equally importantly, and very not often discussed, is actually you learn to ship things together. Because the best teams are the ones that have stayed together the most, that know how to work together. And you don't necessarily need to always do that with original IP, especially if you struggle to, get it funded at the beginning. And then the idea for doing original IP, on top of it being cool and your own thing, is that work for hire is very mercenary. Usually, most contracts, you're paid to do the thing, and you don't get a royalty, revenue share cuts at the end. Sometimes you do, like actually on Minecraft Legends, it's so big that we're able to, but most of the work we do, we actually don't. So you always have to, keep moving and line up the next contract. Whereas original IP is yours, you own it, it's in Steam. If you manage it well, there's a recurring revenue there where you quote unquote, you have nothing to do, and it just keeps accruing. The other important thing is it's also a great creative outlet. When you work on work for hire stuff, it's not your thing. There's very strict parameters. I mean, if you have recurring relationship, which is the best you can hope for, then you might be bored of working on the 4th iteration of that partner game. And so all of a sudden, if you have this little release valve there, you can bring some of your people, have a little bit of fun. And so there's a really interesting documentary that you might have seen from NoClip about Arcane. Sorry, there's a lot of Bethesda references in there. But they're a genuinely amazing studio. And Arcane, for the longest time, actually, was also in that hybrid model. And if you watch the documentary, you'll see what's very interesting is some of the projects they worked on. You can see how later on, they kind of like fueled and inspired their original IP. In particular, LMNO, the project they had with EA and Steven Spielberg, which was like this kind of immersive sim, very replayable, only 3 hours. You're like, that's probably where the first seeds for Deathloop and Prey Mooncrash, the roguelite mode, were planted. That's where they started experimenting with it, And The Crossing, which is not work for hire, but The Crossing, that was their first iteration with the invasion mode you have in Deathloop. So those things, if you set them properly, they can actually feed each other, and there's a bit of a benefit to that. And for us, Minecraft Legends was really that, because it's a hybrid of action and strategy game. So it's a bit like the Overlord game, if you know them, or older references like a Sacrifice or Giant Citizen Kabuto. So you have one character that you control in the world, but that character actually allows you to build bases, to create mobs that will fight with you. So you're basically the cursor, if I do a very dumb version of it. But the interesting thing is that it allowed us to stretch, our skills in, okay, this game is a strategy game, but it's got direct control, third-person camera, it's in an open world. On top of that, it was like 7-platform and crossplay. So it was kind of the ideal setup where it leveraged some of our existing skills, but there's also was an opportunity for us to build up new skills and acquire them, and we're able to convince the partner there that we'd be able to do that and rise up to the challenge. The other cool thing that we learned with Minecraft Legends was how to build and expand IP. So as I mentioned earlier, if you go see the Minecraft movie, you'll see that the main antagonists, they're the piglin. One of the key plot points is them blocking out the sun on that. That's literally the story of Minecraft Legends. And the design of the piglins that you see are actually very much inspired by the piglins that were created at BBI, in partnership with Mojang, but it was very much coming from the studio. But we learned a ton about how you take an existing IP and how you expand it, and also how you say, not too much, because the people at Mojang, they're very careful. If you look at the title of this movie, it's interesting. It's not the Minecraft movie, it's a Minecraft movie. And Minecraft Legends is framed in the same way where it's Legends. Because Mojang is acutely aware that what people love about Minecraft is they make it their own, they appropriate it, and they tell stories. You have all those famous content creators that have long-running podcasts and streams where they keep the story. So they don't want to invalidate it. They don't want to say, oh, this is canon and this is not Disney style. They actually want to make room for everything. And for us, that was really interesting in how we learned to also manage our own IP. So all that is great, but there's stuff that's not so great, and that's sometimes very difficult. And so obviously having those two different lines of work creates a huge split in terms of studio focus, because they're on different timelines, different resources. Resources definitely a big one where if you have any questions, I'd love to connect you to our producers. But the shape of those projects is very different. When we're talking of full development work for Minecraft Legends, yeah, okay, that apart from the fact that you don't own it, it's not too dissimilar. But full development work for hire these days, it's rarer and rarer. So a lot of the opportunities are co-dev. And well, to co-dev, it will be shorter engagements. It will be usually teams that don't do the full game. They will do a specific area, a mode, multiplayer, or take care of level design. So you have to carve out your studio and your teams in ways that are really, really complicated. So huge conundrums there. And then you can get typecast very easily. And the challenging thing is you also want to get typecast in a way, because when you're pitching yourself to people, it's like when you're pitching a game for everyone's a game for no one. Same for a co-dev studio. If you're good at everything on paper, no one will believe that you're good at anything. So you want to have a few specialties there, but at the same time, as I said, the interesting thing of work for hire and co-dev is sometimes you can learn to do something you didn't quite know what to do. So you need to find that in between, and when you get really strongly typecasted, that can be pretty tough. And then, last but not least is sometimes you build things and, well, either through agreements because the client owns it and there's nothing you can bring over, or just they have a different tech stack. Like Minecraft is built in Bedrock, so completely proprietary tech stack. There's not a lot of stuff we've built that, even the backend for crossplay, that we could easily bring into Unity and Unreal, which are our main engines right now. So those are all kind of things you want to keep in mind, and every engagement will have different parameters. But one benefit of doing all this, and bothering with all this, including for finding a co-development, that is not obvious at first, is because we have those two hats, we get to talk and interact with people when we ask them for work differently. And so when we go talk to a studio and looking for work for hire, we can talk as developers, from developer to developer. We've created original IP, start to finish. And so all of a sudden, it creates a very different relationship. And if you ever had a role in sales, you know that the best way to sell something to someone, it's actually not to sell it to them, is to make them want the thing and to make them want to actually be close to your brand because you're cool. And so for us, the fact that Shipbreaker was this weird game that was unlike anything else where you cut spaceships, and it's not what has been keeping the studio afloat. The bulk of the revenue still work for hire. But this game's so freaking different and cool that all of a sudden we can go talk to just so many people. And that's actually allowed us recently to land a gig with an Xbox studio for one of their big AAA action RPG. Can't name which it is because it's not disclosed, but they're fans of Shipbreaker. That's how it happened. They were like, oh yeah, I want to talk to those guys, right? And then because their game is in first-person view, they were like, oh, okay, yeah, we trust that you can rise up to the challenge. So that's how sometimes it works in unconventional ways. So we've talked about all the things that I think are like sort of fairly obvious with, work for hire and how you have to, manage it and balance it with original IP. But I think the biggest impact that it's going to have if you ever follow this path is the culture of your studio and how you manage it. And this one can be a little bit tough. So what's culture? I love this quote from supposedly Peter Drucker, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast. Because yeah, you have those grand plans and all that, but in the end, the plans, they will die at first contact. And so what is, culture first? So people will tell you there's values, there's stuff, there's things you put in memorandums and nice slides. The way I would define culture, it's basically patterns, habits of behaviors that you keep doing as a studio and that other people take on because they see them, being done, and then everyone starts adopting it. So it's really modeled by example, right? And so that's really important because all of a sudden, when you have work for hire and original IP, you have two very different ways of functioning. There are two very different approaches. And so you might have seen those articles. If you haven't, I really encourage you to go read them. The one on the left, the clickbait title, I'm not so sure about it, but it's very interesting. It's just Brian Francis from Game Developer, who notices how a lot of the games at PAX were very different because there's a lot of small team who go along with small resources, who are very careful to, manage their budget, but they also make very interesting and weird games, very different from the big AAA organization. We have a plan, this is going to be done within this amount of time, and then we go big and strong from the start. The other one, who's from Paul Kilduff-Taylor, the founder of Mod7, Frozen Synapse, is really interesting because he compares in the music domain what he calls the musician and then the artist. And he's like, the musician understands the market, what works well, what's popular, and they keep very in touch with that. But at the same time, that's also their limitation. And they're on a short timeline, just like you're on work for hire and codev. The artist is doing this. The artist is trying to find what lives in the negative space. Because when you see something and you see a trend, by the time you can release the game, and games take so long, well, the trend will have gone. So you need to kind of like peek through the cracks and get a sense of like how things are moving. And so when you have a studio that does the two tracks, that's where it's a little bit difficult because you will start having teams that are formed differently. On the work for hire side, usually you'll have people who are more experts and generalists. So you have people who go super deep on one discipline, and then some that are like a bit more surface level on everything. And then when you go on original IP, you find actually what works really well is people who are T-shaped, where like they can really overlap with each other, they can pick up slack, but then they still have one domain, one area where they're pretty strong. And so the risk when you do those two things and you don't actively and intentionally manage it is you can have a culture split and you can have something where it feels like you have two classes of citizen. You have the people who do the work for hire and bring in the money, at least at the beginning. And then they're enabling the people who do the cool stuff and are a small team and they get to have the fun project. And this is something, very, very tricky. And so in like 2 minutes, I'm going to try to wrap so we have questions. But now I'm going to walk you through how we tried to address that at Blackbird, because we did run in this problem. So we have something we call the Skunkworks program. It's our new IP incubation program. We run it once to twice a year. And the idea is that anyone can pitch. So first, there's no first class, whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter if you're like a producer, even if you're on HR, I don't care. You can pitch. And at first, really, it's just a paper pitch. And we encourage people to form teams that are cross-discipline, cross-projects. And all that is required is a paper pitch, exciting idea, show us why it's different, and then yeah, show us a little bit why you understand the market. But really, it's a chance for everyone to play in that space. And we also guarantee you that if your pitch is not selected, you keep the idea. Unlike most studios, that's also what is a bit of a blocker of original IP. Here, no, you keep the property of it. And so the way it kind of works is like, yeah, we give some guidance in terms of like, well, some interesting, movements we've seen in the space. We also teach people how to build a pitch deck. So there's, and so we go through the whole process. Eventually, a team will select it, and the team that's selected gets a few months and resources to build it in-house, and then we take it to a publisher. But what's really interesting in this, to me, is that, well, we might get original IP at the end, but we produce something else through this process. And what we produce is a set of common references, a set of shared frames, and basically we're building studio culture. Because one of the big things we share during the exercise to help people think about their game is resources in terms of how do you think of like marketability versus uniqueness, which is the whole conundrum around original IP. So here as well, if you haven't seen those talks, I really encourage you to go watch them. The deep dives from Ryan Clark from Brace Yourself Games. Jason De La Roca has a great, if a bit old, but great write-up about how your game itself and the game mechanics are better suited to discoverability and virality. But to go back to my point, yeah, this is the really interesting byproduct of this original IP incubation process we have, is that it actually helps bring everyone around studio culture and create a bit of a link. The challenging thing is once you start the original IP, and so once you have a bunch of people there who gets to play in this space and do the cool stuff, you want to be really careful that they don't get poached because all of a sudden there's a big contract, a big project that gets in and, oh, we need Elliot or James or just for a month. And it's like, no. That's the thing. It's like small team, lean, long burn, let them find the fun, let them have the room to pivot, manage the cost. So someone has to be a real mama bear there and just really protect that space and those teams. And so there's a talk you can see about Shipbreaker. It's public now, it's a GDC talk, but it's exactly that, where Rory, our chief creative officer, and Elliot, the game director, go back on the initial parameters of basically, what the studio told that team on Shipbreaker, and they were like, it's not about money. We have to manage costs, and this is the budget you have, but we can waste that money. We can actually not break even. That's how we've set up the thing. But what we want you to find is how you build original IP, how we learn that process, and so that we can spread it through the studio, and there's more people that can, partake in it. And the interesting thing as well, when you do all this and when you share this culture, is that you can also help educate people on like why original IP matters, because that's the big dream when you do original IP is, to create the flywheel. So I don't know if you've ever seen this drawing from Walt Disney, but that was his grand plan in the 30s or 40s, where he was explaining to everyone at the company that, okay, the movies are at the center of the business, but the movies fill then in the toy products. They feed into the theme park. They feed into the cruises. They feed into all the other things. And so, nowadays, really IPs are created with video games. I don't think anyone here would be surprised by that. And if you look at all the ones to the right, that's exactly, where they're getting. And so it's a really, important aspect there to kind of remind everyone why we're taking this risk, why we're also allowing some people to have a bit more fun. It's because, well, we sustain the studio with the work for hire, it's a bit more predictable, but then, we take shots at that dartboard I was mentioning, and then at some point there's one that might, be bullseye, or at least, well, gradually we'll get closer to the bullseye. So TLDR, that hybrid model, it's extremely demanding on leadership, because you come at it, you look at it, you think it's a production problem, you think it's a resource problem. Yeah, it kind of is, but those things are like, you see them. They're not easy to solve, but they're knowns. But the real challenge is actually the studio culture and how you avoid having a sense of like two different classes and two different types of people that compete. And then finally, work for hire is changing a lot. And so there's also interesting opportunities there. And for us, we've been able as well to leverage some of our specificities a bit more. So here again, I was saying Shipbreaker, it's a good foot in the door for us to talk to studios. And recently, the work for hire opportunities, there's quite a few, but they tend to be smaller. It's a lot of co-dev. But thanks to that, we've been able to work with smaller studios, but really creative ones. And it's something where not only do we leverage our capacity to lend them resources, but now we can also share our experience of like creating IP, and we can, advise them a little bit. And then we can start discussing deals and ways of working together that are not just, oh, you pay us so you can use our people, but maybe, well, we'll lend you our people at cost. But then, hey, we'll be kind of a partner in there and we'll take a little stake in your studio. And so, because we think your game is interesting and we can advise you on that. And so all of a sudden you find a very different way of doing work for hire, which for us is interesting because it's really at the confluence of the two lines of work that we have. And so one of them, and after that it's the end of this presentation, is Ambrosia Sky. It's a game that was announced at the PC gaming show. And it's a very interesting spin on work simulators, just like Shipbreaker was. Okay, so up there you might need to cue up the video for the sound.
Dahlia, I know you're nervous about going home, but you're going to be fine. We don't know the state of the crisis. A job's a job, right? Get in, get out. Don't get sucked back in. Remember, D, it's just a job.
So if you're wondering, this game was inspired by a phenomenon in Japan called kodokushi, which is a lot of people die alone in Japan. They're estranged from their family. I mean, we've all heard the stories about how society is very different in Japan. And so you have a job that is people who come in and clean the place, obviously take care of the body, but they actually also help put the soul to rest. Like they organize the items of the deceased person. They take time to be in the space to get to know them, to acknowledge them. And so this game is kind of like a sci-fi spin on it. Just like Shipbreaker or game was a sci-fi spin on the people who cut actual ship, like vessels, commercial vessels, on the beach of Elang in India. And so, yeah, that's it. Thank you for your time. Sorry I had to rush a little bit because we lost 10 minutes, but we may have a few minutes for questions. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. So if you have questions, just raise your hands up, and the staff member will come.
Et on peut la faire en français ou en anglais. Enfin là, pour le coup, il y a plus de problème.
As you wish. Hello. Thank you for the nice talk. I was wondering, I have two connected questions, basically. How you find a job in this industry, and what kind of studio is expected to do a higher job? Because I suppose that the big studios tends to be more appreciated, but maybe not. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the first thing is the big studios and a lot of people who look for work for hire, they will only look at the massive studios, right? So like the people like the team from Soft Rains that we just saw, or Brass Lion, the Wutong game, Virtuos or the other ones don't necessarily think of approaching them. So I'd say there's an interesting thing you can do is keep an eye on Steam and see some of the games that are popping up. You have indie teams that all of a sudden find massive success, but they're not necessarily connected into the traditional ecosystem yet. And so they will need resources and help. So if you think of like, here in France, there's the big success of Drama Studio and a record, they're actually here looking for partners. See? And so that's the interesting thing is like they were kind of caught by surprise by this success. But the big co-dev outfits, they don't necessarily think of that. So being actually interested in independent games is cool because independent games now can have such breakout hits that they will need also a partner studio. And then the other thing I think is, well, you have to know exactly what are your very specific things, what you're really good at. So us, original IP or a brand extension, like we created stuff that ended up in Minecraft Legends, not just the game, but like characters and stories. So that's usually what we put forward. We're like, yeah, we can do work, but it's not just about building your game, it's helping you build your IP. So that's the first thing we usually come forward with. And the second one is we're actually really good at custom engines. We work with Remedy and Northlight. We work with that Xbox studio I mentioned, which is also a proprietary engine. Warcraft is also a proprietary engine. So those are kind of like the angles we found to get at people and be like, okay, this is what makes us special.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk. Quick question, you were talking about trying to manage the team, being split in two, doing the quote-unquote cool projects, with that whole thing tying with the culture of the place you work at. Is there other stuff that management puts into place to manage the attractiveness of these quote-unquote cooler projects?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if it's exactly an answer to your question, but another thing that management does to create link there is that we have like a studio director team, right? And what they do is they will, obviously there are people with a lot of experience, they're more like expert in those kind of typology I showed, exactly. And they will mentor and chaperone the teams. So after we choose one or two teams to incubate new IP, that layer of directors will help them through. And so that also creates a bit of a mentoring relationship. And then once they've mentored them enough, it actually, that duty of mentoring transfers to like leads and principals, because obviously studio directors have tons of other stuff to do. And so it creates a bit of a virtuous relationship, just like you have, with like student teacher. And so that's something as well that has helped, bridge the gap and avoid like this kind of like two cultures and almost like two-headed studios that have nothing to share with one another.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
On va s'arrêter là. Merci à tous.
Merci à tous. Bonne journée.
Si vous avez encore des questions, n'hésitez pas à passer par le Discord.